Now feathered fast in icy fields, in vain I loose the sleeping sail. In frozen wave no longer yields, as useless blows the favoring gale. Yet still in hopes of April showers, and breeze moist with morning dew, I pass the lingering lazy hours, reflecting on the spring and you. Philip Freneau, Baltimore, Maryland, 1789.
January 2nd, 1752. In a small house on Frankfurt Street in New York City, Agnes and Pierre Freneau had just given birth to their first child. A soon-to-be writer, editor, and mariner was born. His powerful patriotic verses earned him the nickname the Poet of the Revolution. American Revolutionary War soldiers set his poems to music and sang his poems during the uncertain days of war.
So much influence came from his family's trade. His father was a wine merchant that had made its way from France to America, and was very involved in what would be considered the Atlantic trade routes along the eastern United States. It created a bit of prosperity for the individual family, and his mother was very educated, and the home was filled with books. Home libraries were a rarity back then.
5 years later, Peter Freneau, who's Philip's younger brother, was born. The Freneaus moved to a plantation in Matawan, New Jersey. They called it Mount Pleasant. At just 15 years of age, Philip Freneau was able to enter the sophomore class of Princeton. He had ambitions of becoming a poet.
As much as we may think of him as just another colonial era personage, he was very much in the room with many of what we would call the renowned founding fathers. He was very much captured by their beliefs that, he had a strong imagination about what a modern republic would look like, independent of England. And we can only be assured, given his close proximity. As a matter of fact, James Madison was his roommate, I believe, for a term during his time at the College of New Jersey, Princeton. So they must have had many conversations that probably, bordered on the political as well as philosophical.
Some say a painting the Matawan Historical Society acquired is a portrait of Freneau shortly after he graduated from Princeton.
I wrote to the art museum in Princeton, to the curator of the art museum, whose name escapes me at the moment. I can provide you with that. But he's a very nice guy. He wrote back and he said, we don't have any records that far back. I think some things disappeared in a fire and so forth. And he said that he looked at the painting. He says, well, it's very doubtful that it's a Copley painting. And I said, well, where can I get further information? Because he recommended the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston as well. So I wrote to them. I didn't hear anything. And then I decided to look up somebody who knew something about Freneau and something about Copley. So I contacted Jane Kamensky, who's the professor at Harvard. She just appeared in the Burns documentary about the Revolution. And she was very interested in the painting. She said, it's a great painting. She looked at it. She goes, I really don't think it's a Copley either. She goes, why do we, it's a beautiful painting for what it is. It doesn't look like a Copley. To me, it looks like it was done by an artist named John Wollaston. And Wollaston was you're familiar with Wollaston. He was a painter who was painting in this area around 1750, early 1750s. And he did a lot of portraits of local people, New York area people. There are a few of his paintings in the Monmouth County Historical Association Museum. And she said, you could recognize his style from the almond eyes. There's a characteristic shape of the eyes that all Wollaston paintings had. So she sent this off to a bunch of her friends at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. they all concurred that they look more like a Wollaston than a Copley. And then Jane Kamensky asked the question, why do we think it's Philip Freneau? Why not maybe a Freneau relative? Maybe it's possibly an older brother or his father. Because it apparently had a identification of P. Freneau on it at some point. And I said, well, Freneau's brother was younger than he was. So it's likely not his brother. Could be his father. So looking at the painting, it did bear resemblance to a painting of Philip Freneau's mother, Agnes.
Right. There's always going to be differences of opinion when it comes to some of the provenance of certain things. So, in my opinion, you always got to look for the best evidence, right? And so, when Mike Chartier originally found this out, he had several references that went back a long period of time. So, he had references where this was cataloged as a Copley, as Freneau, going back to 1929. So it was referenced then. It was referenced by the Plimpton family, who eventually donated it. It was even referenced in the Sotheby's auction. The problem with that is that it didn't sell as one, because there was some ambiguity about whether or not it was Copley himself or the school of Copley. Now, one of the things is that, so I have a couple of differences of opinion with some of this. Historically, opinion, as most historians have differences of opinions on different things. One of them is that if you look at any of the Copley or the School of Copley portraits, it's most common that it's that side profile. You can see, like, even with his mother's profile, like if this was the same painter, it's a different side profile. Most of Copley's portraits are on the right side. They're usually facing that direction. So even if it's not him, I think there's some evidence that it could have at least been the school of. The biggest reason why I think it's certainly Philip Freneau is because, for the same reason somebody doesn't counterfeit a dollar bill, right? It's not something of super high value. If this was a Copley of George Washington and somebody was trying to put it off as George Washington because it was going to increase the value, then makes sense. But because Philip Freneau is really only known in the spheres of literature, of Monmouth County, and super buffs of the American Revolution, there's not a whole reason to counterfeit it. The other thing is, too, is that the tag that was placed there, which is probably, a later 1800s tag, so it was certainly at least 100 years later, it is referenced very specifically on the portrait, even from that time period, as as Philip Lawrence Freneau, John Singleton Copley. Now, again, is this from when it was done? Of course not. But the idea that somebody would try to pass it off, why would they pass it off to somebody like Freneau, where it's not going to necessarily add a maximum value?
A couple of ideas on that. I have to disagree with almost everything Curtis said.
He had ambitions of becoming a poet, and he frequently read English poets and was fluent in Latin and Greek. Poetry was not making a living, especially during the Revolutionary War. So Freneau turned to being a mariner.
As near your shores I spread my weary sail, from bar to bar, from cape to cape I stray, from you still absent, still too far away. What shall repay me for these weeks of pain, these weeks of absence on this restless main? Philip Freneau. There's something the characteristic about poets who've been on the sea. They have spent a great deal of time on the water in solitude. I mean, they may be there with other crew members, but it's a great environment for a poet with their thoughts and to start writing about it, which is certainly what Freneau did. From the vast caverns of old ocean's bed, fair Santa Cruz arising laves her waste. The threatening waters roar on every side, for every side by ocean is embraced. Philip Freneau, Santa Cruz. When lingering to his end Alcander drew, officious friends besieged his lofty door. Impatient they the dying man to view, and touch that hand they soon must touch no more. Philip Freneau, The Jamaica Funeral.
Far from the chaos of war, Philip Freneau is living quietly on the islands of Bermuda when the Revolutionary War erupts across the colonies. While battles rage in North America, Freneau remains overseas, watching the events from a distance. For years, he stays there, separated from the struggle that will soon define his life. In July 1778, he finally returns home to Monmouth County, New Jersey. His arrival comes at a dramatic moment. The thunder of muskets and cannons shake the countryside during the nearby Battle of Monmouth just the month before. The war is no longer distant. It is on his doorstep. Inspired by the conflict unfolding around him, Freneau begins to write. His poetry captures the spirit of the revolution and its anger, its hope, and its determination. The verses spread quickly, earning him a growing reputation as one of the voices of the American cause. But Freneau is not content to fight only with his words. He joins a New Jersey militia, taking up arms against the British. In one skirmish, a shot strikes him in the knee. Though wounded, he survives. But the injury reminds him that the revolution demands real sacrifice. Freneau returns to the sea. He becomes involved in one of the war's most dangerous occupations, running the British blockade. As a blockade runner and privateer, he sails through waters patrolled by enemy ships, risking capture at every turn. At one point, while in Philadelphia, he even helps build and outfit his own vessel, the Aurora. But the ocean is unforgiving. On its maiden voyage, the British forces intercept his ship. Freneau is captured.
The frigate was the Iris, returning from Charleston, New York, with the express of the former's being taken. We now began to fire upon each other at the distance of about 300 yards. The frigate held us several times. One shot went betwixt wind and water, which made the ship leak amazingly, making 24 inches in 30 minutes. We found our 4-pounders, but were trifles against the frigate, so we got our 9-pounder, the only one we had, pointed from the cabin window, with which we played upon the frigate for about a half an hour. At last, a 12-pound shot came from the frigate, and striking a parcel of our oars lashed upon the starboard quarter, broke them all in two, and continuing its destructive course, struck Captain Labateau in the right thigh, which it smashed to atoms, tearing part of his belly open at the same time, with the splinters from the oars. He fell from the quarterdeck close by me, and for some time seemed very busily engaged in setting his leg to rights. Philip Freneau, some account of the capture of the ship Aurora.
When questioned, he denies being a privateer. He claims that he is nothing more than an ordinary sailor, hoping the lie might spare him from harsher punishment. But the British are unconvinced, and he is transported to New York City, where authorities stage what amounts to be a sham trial. The verdict is already decided, and soon afterward he is sent to one of the most dreaded places of war, a floating prison, a British prison ship.
The various horrors of these hulks to tell, these prison ships where pain and horror dwell, where death in tenfold vengeance holds his reign, and injured ghosts yet unavenged complain. This be my task, ungenerous Britons you, conspire to murder those you can't subdue. Philip Freneau, British prison ship.
I think that, and if you look at the portrait of what we think's his mother, it's a very similar, kind of look.
Freneau was
And just let me finish real quick. So also the death mask, I mean, it's kind of funny to me. I think it's funny that we accept that as kind of what he looks like. It was made from memory 20 years after. And here we have a portrait that's labeled, referenced in 1929, and everyone's fighting to say it's not him.
So. Except that the people in his family agreed that was a good likeness of him if you look at the documentation.
Well, I mean, it's still 20 years after he was dead.
Post-mortem one?
When he was dead.
Oh, the Boston, yeah, but that was like 20 years after he died.
So,
but the
I
thing
don't know.
is,
There's a lot of conjecture. Barry makes points, good
Right.
points too. But
and don't get me
that's
wrong,
just my
too,
personal
but
opinion.
we got to remember too, we're also not comparing photographs, right? So like when anybody paints a portrait, whether it's that portrait or that portrait, you're going to have somewhat of an inconsistency just based on stylistic purposes, right? So we can't say, I mean, like somebody could take our portrait today and we would look like two different people, right? Because it would be two different artists that are referencing different parts of our body. So the idea that we're going to compare that to that and see if there's a consistency with the appearance, that's a hard argument too, because that's going to be different.
He married Eleanor Foreman in 1789. Historians have said that Eleanor was a literate nasty and wanted to put Fresneau's poetry on hold so that he can earn a more profitable living. However, Eleanor was extremely generous, well-read, and educated.
My two little girls and books are my chief comforters. I wish it was in my power to send you but as good a collection of the latter as we have here. You would not feel the loss of friends and the want of company so much as you do. There is always something wanting to complete of our happiness. We must endeavor to make ourselves as independent of the world, for that is possible, and let our own minds furnish us with that pleasure that too many go in search of abroad.
Somebody recalls Fresneau at this party where somebody was trying to sketch him. This artist was trying to sketch him, and Fresneau saw that and he put a stop to it because he did not want his portrait taken. There's also a reference in the
really good experience.
one of Fresneau's descendants, the collection that Yale has now. They have like a silhouette of Fresneau, an image of Fresneau, and the descendant, one of his grandnieces or something, wrote a note that went along with it, said this is the only known image of Fresneau done during his lifetime. Fresneau did not want his portrait done, and there's questions about how he would have paid Copley or any artist to do this during when he was graduated from college. We've had a couple of clothing experts, historical type people, look at it. It looks more like 1750-ish clothing than 1770-ish clothing.
By midnight moons or moistening dews, in habit for the chase arrayed, the hunter still the deer pursues, the hunter and the deer a shade. And long shall timorous fancy see the painted chief and pointed spear, and reason's self shall bow the knee to shadows and illusions here. Philip Freneau. The Indian Burying Ground.
James Madison and Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson encouraged Freneau to relocate to Philadelphia to edit a partisan newspaper that would challenge the Federalist paper, the Gazette of the United States. Freneau founded a newspaper called the National Gazette. He would repeatedly criticize the politics of Alexander Hamilton, who was a fierce rival of Madison and Jefferson's. Washington, on the other hand, disliked the writings, reportedly called him that rascal Freneau.
To be called a rascal was a much more serious thing than we would refer to it today. Maybe the more closer nomenclature that we use today, and even it is a bit archaic in the American tongue, would be rapscallion. And basically they just meant a person of ill repute, a person you can't trust. And I'm sure that's exactly how Washington felt, seeing that somebody that he had been friendly with in the past, and then at a time when he and Jefferson were not so much on different sides, but someone that he felt, why would this person come and attack me or attack my policies? Obviously, the American political experiment brought forth a lot of contention. Such charm shall greet my longing soul no more. Her lively eyes are closed in endless shade. Torpid she rests on yonder marble floor. Approach and see what havoc death has made. Philip Freneau, A House of the Night.
It's really difficult to make identifications from pictures. I do.
By the way, Mark is a former FBI agent, and
Well, yeah.
he's familiar with principles of evidence and preponderance of evidence. And
So is Curtis.
Curtis doesn't know anything about that.
So I do a lot of MIA recovery work, and I'm dealing with descendants, nephews, nieces of bomber crews from World War II. and I'll get the crew photographs, and they've never seen their grandparents or their great uncles. They never saw them. They were children, and so I can't tell you how many times I pass those pictures out, and the people can't pull out their own relatives. They just can't. They say, that's the guy. I say, no, that's not him. That's somebody else.
He was about 80 years old when this happened. He was certainly one who had lived a full life and had raised a family of 4 daughters, not justifying that, his death. It was certainly an unfortunate accident. But let's think about colonial era times. The inn itself probably had candles and lanterns lit. But once he probably got more than 100 feet away, to wherever his home was, there were certainly no street lights. There were no guides. There was no chance of being able to establish a path if the snow had been already covered with snow. It's not hard to imagine how he became disoriented at night when it was dark. And of course, maybe some limitations in his senses at 80 years old. His death has a poetic aspect that he has died in this very, very stark circumstance, simply because of an indifference to the ferocity of the weather. These heights, the pride of all the coast, what happy genius planned, aspiring over the distant wave that sinks the neighbored land. These hills for solitude designed, this bold and broken shore, these haunts impervious to the wind, tall oaks that to the tempest bend, half druid I adore.
The Monmouth, New Jersey Inquirer records the death of Philip Freneau, Esquire, extensively known as one of the best of the early poets of this country. He expired on the 18th instant, at the ripe age of about 80 years. The melancholy circumstances of his death are thus stated in the Monmouth paper. Quote, Mr. Freneau was in the village and started towards evening to go home, about 2 miles. In attempting to go across, he appears to have got lost and mired in a bog meadow, where his lifeless corpse was discovered yesterday morning. Captain Freneau was a staunch Whig in time of the Revolution, a good soldier and a warm patriot. The productions of his pen animated his countrymen in the darkest days of '76, and the effusions of his muse cheered the desponding soldier as he fought the battles of freedom. End quote. The New York Evening Post, December 25th, 1832.
It's the same way why Pluto's not a planet, right? All of a sudden there's something new, and then somebody changes their mind with it. Or dinosaurs were not lizards, now they're birds, right? So it's you have experts too that change their opinions and their beliefs all the time.
Bloodletting
right? And what I would hope is that maybe one day, sometime in the future, there would be a method, and I think there is. I mean, truthfully, like. I would love to take, we can go and dig up good old Freneau, who's buried right down the street, and do a facial reconstruction, and really see how consistent it is with his appearance. That would be pretty cool.
Well, then we'd be arrested.
Exactly.